We're
Yeah.
losing the world reserve status because we weaponized the dollar. We kicked Russia out of SWIFT. We didn't just sanction them. We confiscated their F4X reserves, and we've used them to rebuild the Ukraine. And at the same time, we tell Saudi Arabia, the linchpin of the dollar hegemony, hey, we're going green. So from Jared Bernstein's standpoint, wanting to shed the world reserve status, the first two things you would do would be to weaponize the dollar and make everyone say, shit, are we next? Are they going to come after us next? And number two, you tell Saudi Arabia, hey, thanks for the memories, guys. It's been awesome.
In recent years, the world has witnessed a significant shift in the international financial landscape, threatening to shake the foundations of the US dollar's status as the world's preeminent currency. This transformation has been described by precious metals expert Andy Schectman, founder and CEO of MilesFranklin.com, as a consequence of actions taken by the United States, which are causing other nations to question the reliability of the dollar as a global currency. Schectman adds, when you own precious metals like gold and silver, you don't have to worry about the risk of someone else failing to deliver on their promise. The US dollar's ascent to its prominent role as the global reserve currency can be traced back to the aftermath of World War II, when the 1944 Bretton Woods Conference solidified its position. However, 2023 has seen an intriguing financial trend, the de-dollarization movement. This movement is an endeavor by an increasing number of nations to diminish the US dollar's influence in international trade. The genesis of this movement can be traced back to 2022, when the United States imposed comprehensive sanctions against Russia following its invasion of neighboring Ukraine. In response, leaders of countries such as China, India, and Brazil have advocated for direct trade in their currencies, circumventing the US dollar. Andy Schectman emphasizes that many countries across Asia, Africa, South America, and the Eurasian Economic Union are united in pursuing alternatives to the dollar, representing 80% of the world's population. Gold, in particular, has emerged as a potent challenger to the dollar's dominance. With its deep historical significance as an internationally recognized currency, the yellow metal now constitutes 15% of global reserves, a notable increase from 11% just 5 years ago. Before diving into Andy Schectman's insightful interview, subscribe to our channel and give this video a big thumbs up.
Look at gold and silver as wealth, not as an investment. There's never been a truer statement in my mind. To me, gold and silver are not an investment. They are plain and simply wealth. And to your point earlier in the discussion about decentralization, there are very few assets, especially commodities on the planet, that represent wealth while simultaneously not being someone else's liability. There is no counterparty risk when you talk about owning precious metals. So the biggest thing that I have focused on for 4 years is the dollar. And I ask people all the time, what makes the dollar the world reserve currency? And more often than not, people don't know. They have no clue. And before I tell you what makes the dollar the world reserve currency, I'll preface it by saying there are two economic advisors, two very prominent economic advisors to the United States government. The lead economic advisor, number one, is a man named Jared Bernstein. And Jared Bernstein's thesis is to relinquish the dollar's world reserve status, calling it a privilege we can no longer afford. He's written reports, those that were picked up by the New York Times and the Washington Post, the most infamous being Dethrone King Dollar. He made comments in dealing with the Biden administration, the Trump administration, and the pushback that they were getting by imposing tariffs on China, and said, good, if this helps relinquish the dollar's world reserve status, that would be great. Now, keep that in mind as I ask the question again, what makes the dollar the world reserve currency? And, you know, I've yet to find someone who usually, well, very rarely anyway, who will get it right away. But to me, there are three things that make the dollar the world reserve. The first is the fact that it is called the petrodollar. And in 1974, we struck a deal with the Saudi kingdom. And we said, we're going to protect you. But for that privilege, you will denominate dollars globally, or denominate oil globally in dollars through OPEC. And the money that you get for selling the oil, you'll recycle it back into our treasuries. And for that, we will protect you in the Saudi kingdom, and no one will ever mess with you again. Now they're being protected by other people. And in the span of a few years since then, Saudi Arabia which is on the Belt Road Initiative, along with every other OPEC country, which is the largest infrastructure project in human history, which currently comprises 75% of human population, 50% of global GDP. Over 150 countries have signed on to the Belt Road. It is linking Asia, Africa, South America, parts of Europe through roads and maritime channels and bridges and railways. The roads and the bridges and the maritime channels and the railways will only be patrolled by military and commerce. It is it's the Panama Canal on steroids.
Wow.
So you put the BRICS nations, or excuse me, the Belt Road nation, you have all of the OPEC countries, including Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has also been formally admitted into the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India,
Right.
China, South Africa. Saudi Arabia has applied to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the largest regional financial and military organization on the planet. Saudi Arabia has applied and joined the BRICS New Development Bank and has told folks in Davos that they are open to taking other currencies for oil. The beginning of the end of the petrodollar is here upon us. Now, if you look at the countries that are in the BRICS, the Belt Road, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the Eurasian Economic Union, they're all the same countries. It comprises 80% of human population, and they are not going green.
As the world undergoes a transformative phase of de-dollarization, gold is one asset that stands to gain significantly from this shifting financial landscape. Early indicators of de-dollarization become apparent when we examine the phenomenon through the lens of currency diversification, particularly in the context of a diminishing share of the US dollar in global foreign exchange reserves. Notably, central banks worldwide have been diversifying their reserves away from the dollar and are poised to continue doing so, with a notable emphasis on accumulating gold and other currencies. Central banks' gold holdings have represented 25% of the global gold demand. Perhaps most telling is that, collectively, global central banks have not sold gold between 2010 and 2022. Surveys conducted among central banks further cement the notion that the appetite for gold remains robust. Andy Schectman, an authority on precious metals, underscores this enduring historical truth. Even in chaotic periods marked by wars and economic crises, gold and silver have consistently maintained their intrinsic value.
To me, as we go through this process, I can tell you that I look at gold and silver as my wealth and not as an investment. Now, they may perform like one.
Oh, good.
But you can go back through all of history and look at the way nobility has owned gold and silver, and it's gone through 2 world wars. It's gone through German hyperinflation. It's gone through the Great Depression and every pandemic and everything that was ever thrown at it. And it is still wealth, so much so, Todd, that over the last 18 months, the most powerful, influential people in the world, the central banks, have bought more gold over the last 18 months than in the history of central banking. Wow. And when you go back to April of 2019, you see the Bank of International Settlements reclassifying gold as the world's only other tier 1 reserve asset. So when I say to you that, to me, gold is wealth and not an investment, I truly do mean that on every level, whether it be from my roots as a 19-year-old kid who was upset that his future had been derailed and now I had to sell gold, into something that I have embraced and truly believe it was the best gift that was ever presented to me, ever given to me, an opportunity not only to build a career from nothing, from scratch, as a very unlikely cast of characters to have succeeded, but to understand what wealth is, what wealth accumulation is, and the importance of having an asset that is not simultaneously someone else's liability. And as I've gone down this pathway leading us to where we are today, I think that statement, much to the way that you look at things in terms of decentralization, has never been more important.
That's right.
And so I think as we talk about physical precious metals in relation to cryptocurrencies and the whole concept of decentralization, they are very much I believe, kindred spirits. And this is not a thing of where it's one or the other or mutually exclusive opportunities. It is that they are both very important and are cut from the same cloth, so to speak, at least in terms of ideology. So
yeah,
I look at precious metals to me as as a way out of the matrix. And I think there is a lot to be said in terms of symbiotic relationship between the new form of decentralization and the old form of decentralization, and putting the two together and looking them as a union that only makes your portfolio stronger, to me is something very intriguing. And we are now just starting to see that in the CPI numbers, which last week came in at 7%, right? And that 7% is a bunch of malarkey.
Yeah, it is.
If you go and listen to John Williams of shadowstats.com, he'll tell us that inflation is actually closer to 12, 13, 14% because the changes they've made in the measurements of inflation, which strip out the cost of energy, the cost of housing, the cost of food, these things that are all inflating, are now no longer measured in the CPI. And so, look, in a nutshell, I guess, energy prices have gone up, interest rates have gone up, and all of this is going to bleed into higher consumer prices. I don't think the market gets this yet. And I think inflation is indeed here to stay.
A notable development occurred in July 2023 when Bolivia, following the footsteps of Brazil and Argentina, opted to conduct imports and exports using the Chinese renminbi, further illustrating this shift away from the dollar. In the face of this global shift away from the US dollar, the rise of gold as a formidable alternative raises fundamental questions about the future of international finance and currency dynamics. As nations increasingly diversify their reserves and explore alternatives, will gold continue solidifying its position as a haven asset and a challenger to the dollar's supremacy? If the video resonates with you, join our community by subscribing to our channel and enabling notifications with the bell icon. Thank you for being a part of our community.